Morning. Live trading of commodities futures and options on the Chicago Mercantile Exchange. The CME is halted. Technical issues hitting assets including equity futures and WTI. We will bring you the latest. US President Donald Trump says he will, quote, permanently pause migration from all third world countries, saying it's needed to allow the US system to fully recover. Plus, Hong Kong's deadliest fire in decades intensifies scrutiny at the city's safety inspection system. At least 94 people are believed to have died. It's just gone 9 a.m. across the Emirates, 5 a.m. here in the UK. I'm Tom McKenzie in London. Let's get you an update in terms of the market action then. We've had 4 straight days of gains in Europe, set for a 5th straight day. Over in Asia, the MSCI Asia Pacific is currently just down 0.1%. The inflation story out of Japan is interesting, keeping alive hopes from some, anyway, that the BOJ could go with another hike in December, with all the caveats around that, of course. European 50 futures currently pointing to very modest gains, again, after 4 straight days of upside for the European stock space. And we'll see if we notch up 5 straight days today. The Japanese yen at 156.26 as we consider the inflationary impact and how to think about the BOJ's next steps. Brent crude at $63 a barrel, up 0.4% on oil as we head up to that OPEC Plus meeting over the weekend, when they're expected to confirm that they will be putting a pause to additional barrels of oil on the market in 2026. That meeting of OPEC Plus, of course, over the weekend. So the Chicago Mercantile Exchange has halted trading of commodities futures and options due to technical issues. The CME Group posted on X saying a cooling issue at its Cyrus 1 data centers is currently being investigated. For more, our energy and commodities reporter Clara Ferreira Marquez joins us now. Clara, what is the extent of the impact of this outage? What do we know at this point?
And we know pretty much what you've just said, which is that there is this technical outage at one of their data centers due to overheating. That has stopped trading across futures and options. This affects a large swathe of commodities contracts, including WTI, which you mentioned, also palm, which is trades on Bursa Malaysia, but through CME's electronic platform, also US Treasuries, S&P 500 futures. So there's a really wide range of assets affected here, and we're waiting to hear a little bit more on how quickly they can resolve this. They will be putting out a pre-open notice once they can.
Let's turn to the OPEC Plus meeting then this weekend, Clara. So oil's been under pressure, clearly. There's a number of factors behind that, and you can unpack that for us. Does it change the calculus, given the strain that oil has been under, the oil space in recent weeks, particularly when we think about the geopolitics and the supply that is coming onto the market? What is expected to feed into the decision-making this weekend?
You're quite right. There is an awful lot going on in oil, and all of that will be on delegates' minds when they meet over the weekend. We don't expect a change. We do expect it to be a pause, but the issues will remain the same. So we're really looking at a very significant glut going into 2026. It's been a very poor month for oil, the worst monthly run since 2023. And if you look at the average price for the month, it's worse still. And the other big question, I think, as you alluded to in your comment on geopolitics, is, of course, the peace plan in Ukraine. If there is a solution there, we don't expect the impact to be immediate, but certainly it would be very significant as that all unwinds. Of course, all to be played for still. For this weekend, not a lot of action from OPEC, but all those big questions still hanging over us.
Clara, what do we know about the compliance right now across OPEC Plus and its members? Are they meeting to the quotas that they've been given? Where are we in that story?
I think that is the long-standing issue here, is even if you do ask people to produce more, how much more can really come to market? And Saudi really remains the member with the greatest capacity. All those questions are important as the market evaluates what OPEC really means. You know, how seriously can they take any talk of increased production? So I think those will also be questions that OPEC has to deal with going forward.
Clara, thank you very much indeed. We look ahead, of course, to that meeting. Clara Ferreira Marquez setting us up in terms of what to think about. Our energy and commodities reporter with the latest, of course, on the outage at the CME and the impact that is having on oil pricing in the session today. Let's get a broader view on these markets right now, because, of course, there are growing bets of an interest rate cut by the Federal Reserve, and that has kept global gauge of equities, the global gauge of equities, a global gauge of equities on track for its best week since June. For more market analysis, let's bring in Mehvish, Ayub, Head of Managed Solutions Advisory Dubai at Bank of Singapore. Mehvish, thank you for your time. Let's start on the rate cut expectations. And what assumptions are you making about December? And if they do cut in December, the Federal Reserve, could it be a hawkish cut given the constraints around inflation?
Good morning, Tom, and thank you for having me on. So I think the really crucial thing to understand is let's look at what the market has been pricing in for that December Fed rate cut. Just over 1 week, it's been as low as a 30% probability, and it's now back up at 80% probability. And I think that's very much in line with the kind of what we've been seeing in equity markets and that relief rally as such.
So you expect a cut from the Fed in December. Exactly. The positions, the betting on the Fed have adjusted. You had Jay Powell coming out just a few weeks ago suggesting that December was very much in play, nothing was locked in, and then you had some Fed officials very close to Jay Powell in recent days suggesting that this is very much a live meeting. We've seen the pricing around that then in the options markets, pricing in more than an 80% chance that the Fed goes in December. If you think beyond December and into 2026, what is the trajectory looking like, particularly if we get more dovish members and a more dovish head of this Federal Reserve?
So the Bank of Singapore view is actually that the Fed will take a pause in the first quarter of next year up until the second quarter, potentially, simply because we don't have clarity around who the next Fed chair is likely to be. But I think the key thing to understand is that uncertainty that you're referring to. It's currently priced at 80% probability, but depending on what Fed official says tomorrow or the day after or early next week, that probability could change again. And those gyrations you're seeing in the equity market and volatility across rates is essentially reflective of that uncertainty around Fed policy. When we take a step back and we think about macro in general, we've seen as we've come into the fourth quarter a lot of optimism baked in, not just with regards to the Fed easing, but also with regards to AI. And that, as you've seen that optimism fade, you've seen increased volatility, and that is adjusting our positioning going forward.
Give us more detail in terms of the positioning going forward then, Mehvish, particularly as we think about additional fiscal stimulus coming through from the US, from the so-called Big Beautiful Bill, and the tax cuts that will really start to take effect in 2026. You could get a fiscal impulse coming through from Japan and the new leadership there. And of course, Europe continues to spend heavily on defence and infrastructure, particularly Germany. All of those things coming together in an environment where you may have lower rates, and yet you're concerned about uncertainty, you're concerned about potential volatility. How do you think about positioning then in the quarters ahead?
So in the medium term, when we think about a whole portfolio advisory context, we are still overweight risk assets, but that it is a lot less than what it was at the beginning of the year. So we are essentially really only overweight Asia Pacific ex-Japan equities. We were overweight European equities earlier on, but that was essentially taking off profit. So our risk position has gone down, but it's still overweight, and that is reflective of the fact that we are in a non-recessionary environment and in a Fed easing cycle, which tends to support risk assets. Now, if we look at the detail across the different asset classes, we are a little bit overweight on equity. We are quite broadly diversified in fixed income, but what we're really talking about and really pushing for clients is that diversification and how to get that over the next 12 to 18 months to protect your portfolio from the risks that we're seeing and potential downside in equity markets and volatility in rates. And there's two key areas there, really. There is having really good diversification in equity. So yes, it's all about US and tech, but have other regional exposure, have other factor exposure other than growth, and have other style exposure, and also thinking about gold and alternatives.
What is the overweight? The overweight on APAC, Mehvish, is that a China story? Is it a Korea exposure to AI story? What is the rationale for that view?
So it is predominantly a China and Hong Kong equity story, and the reason there being you've still got sufficient tailwinds from a valuation perspective with respect to its own history as well as alongside peers, especially when you compare versus valuations in the US market. But you also have the region which is likely to benefit from the weaker dollar that we've seen since the beginning of this year. And it's still a beneficiary of the easing cycles that we're seeing more broadly in developed markets, but particularly in the Fed. So there's still a lot of tailwinds there, even though we do acknowledge the fact that it has had a phenomenal run year to date. exaggerate the numbers that we're seeing, but I do think that was a story waiting to happen, and there's more momentum to go there.
And you talked about gold as a potential hedge, or at least an asset to think about in terms of hedging some of this uncertainty into next year. What is your view on how much further gold has to run from here?
Yeah, gold is tricky. We don't try to think too much about how much it can run from it, but more from a portfolio context. It does add valuable diversification in the context that we have higher inflation or even stagflationary environment. It also hedges against geopolitical risks, which, as we know, with the US administration and the flip-flopping of policy, I think is very important going forward.
Okay, Mehvish, thank you very much indeed. Mehvish Ayub, Head of Managed Solutions Advisory Dubai at Bank of Singapore, with some smart insights into how to think about the markets, the macro, of course, the monetary policy impact into 2026. Some interesting thoughts to end this Friday, or to start the day, if that's where you're at in this journey. Still ahead, we discuss the prospect of a ceasefire between Moscow and Kyiv, as Russian President Putin says he is open to talks, with some important caveats, of course. That's later this hour. But first, US President Donald Trump says he will permanently pause migration from so-called third world countries. More details on that announcement. That is next. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Horizons Middle East and Africa. I'm Tom McKenzie in London. US President Donald Trump in a Truth Social post about half an hour ago saying he would permanently pause migration from all so-called third world countries to allow the US system to fully recover. He says the immigration policy has eroded national progress. Bloomberg's Jill Deesis joins us now for the latest. Jill, what do we know about what Trump has been saying, his announcement, and the potential implications?
Well, Tom, at this point, as is often the case with a lot of these Trump social media posts, we really only know what he's put in these Truth Social messages. I will point out that we don't know exactly which countries he is referring to. I believe the term third world, it's actually quite ill-defined and quite a bit outdated. If I remember correctly, it originates from the Cold War era, referring to countries that didn't align with either NATO or the Soviet Union. Obviously, in recent decades, it's been used often in a pejorative sense to refer to poor nations. You may want to consider, countries that are maybe least developed, but it does kind of give you a sense of maybe the types of countries that Trump may be referring to with this type of language that he's using here. But again, I think, what we're ultimately looking for is more details from Trump and the Trump administration as to the total number of buckets of countries he may be referring to in his attempt to ban immigration here. The other thing that I will point out is that the Trump administration has, in recent months, obviously, embarked on this very large immigration campaign, or sort of anti-immigration campaign, and named a number of countries, particularly from less developed areas, that it is seen as a concern that may be something that Trump is ultimately trying to communicate here.
And Jill, this is in response. This is in response to what happened, of course, in Washington, the shooting of two National Guardsmen, and ultimately and sadly the death of one of those guardsmen. This is the Trump administration response to that incident.
I do think that it's really difficult, Tom, to divorce these two things here, particularly because the Trump administration has used that very unfortunate shooting to sort of further some of its rhetoric against immigration. We'll point out that the suspected gunman in that case was an Afghan national. And as part of the review, the investigation that the Trump administration has sort of undertaken in response to the shooting, there's been some questions about, sort of the repatriation of people from Afghanistan, particularly after the U.S. evacuation a few years ago to the United States, as to how much of that is ultimately sort of entering the calculus here. Again, Tom, I think the bottom line is that the Trump administration is obviously, looking to sort of further a lot of its, stricter restrictions on immigration. We've seen a number of steps, very significant steps over the year that Trump has really been in office to sort of restrict those that immigration. We've seen, raids from ICE, for example. This does seem to be sort of a further step. Obviously, this is so far, again, just a social media post from Donald Trump. So still waiting for some more details on exactly how this would be enacted, which countries would be impacted. But I do think that when you're looking at the broader context of how exactly the Trump administration has approached immigration, during this year, it does kind of give you a sense that, we're looking toward an administration that's trying to become even more restrictive.
OK, Bloomberg's Jill Deeses. We'll see what this means, of course, this post in practical terms. It's a story we will continue to monitor. Jill, with an important update there. Jill Deeses out of Hong Kong. Thank you. Coming up, talking of Hong Kong, we're going to bring you the latest, of course, on the one of the deadliest fires in that city in decades. We're going to be live from Hong Kong with an update. Stay with us. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Horizons Middle East and Africa. I'm Tom Mackenzie in London. Now, Hong Kong firefighters say they are close to completing their search of 7 burnt-out apartment towers after fires now known to have killed at least 94 people. Dozens of survivors remain in hospital, with hundreds more left homeless as a criminal investigation continues into the cause of the disaster. Earlier today, we spoke to Hong Kong Legislative Council member Regina Ip on the blaze.
More questions are being raised whether we should continue to allow bamboo scaffoldings to be used for such massive operations. It has been pointed out before that bamboo scaffolding should only be used for smaller scale renovation, not for renovation of such a large scale project encompassing 8 blocks of housing estates. Labour Department already found some of the materials were not compliant with government standards. And it is really sad that the bamboo scaffolding coupled with the non-fire retardant mesh netting and the dry weather and the windy weather caused the fire to spread so quickly and led to such colossal loss of life and property.
Well, our China correspondent Min Min Lo joins us now from close to the location of the fire. Min Min, what is the latest on the search?
Yeah, it is a little bit chaotic here because we heard from the fire service department initially calling for us to gather here for a press conference. You can see over there in front of the red truck there are podiums being set up. It was supposed to happen at 1 p.m. right now, but it was later moved up to 12:30 and then later it was cancelled and then now they moved it back to 2 p.m. They're saying that they're still verifying the information. They did tell us that they will give us an update after they complete the forcible entry into every single unit to ensure that there are no persons still left behind trapped inside the building. So we're waiting for the latest toll, but as of now, it's standing at 94 deaths, 76 people injured. As of yesterday morning, hundreds of people were still unaccounted for and were missing. So we don't have update on whether that has been resolved. And right now here, we're close to an evacuation center and upstairs there is a makeshift sort of distribution center for donated goods. It sprung up entirely organically by residents nearby who started donating items from blankets and sheets to toilet papers. And this morning I was walking around and I saw some residents actually sleeping inside the mall just on the mattresses and seeking refuge there. Some of them said they didn't want to go to the evacuation centers that were further away. It was their choice to sleep in the mall, which is just about across the road from where the scene of the fire is. Some of them are really anxious to find out when they can go back to their homes. They want to see if there are anything left behind. In fact, one man told me he's hoping he could sleep at home tonight, which honestly is looking quite unrealistic at this point. They're also anxious to know when they could get that 10,000 Hong Kong dollar compensation that John Lee announced yesterday. But the residents are told to wait for a phone call. They're also wanting to find out when they can move into transitional housing because the government has said they have found 800 units across Hong Kong that could serve as transitional housing in the longer term. But meantime, there are 9 of these shelters that will remain open as long as there are residents who need it. There has been hotels that are volunteering to give out free hotel rooms for the next couple of weeks just to help the residents tide through this transitional period.
OK, so the human impact there being illustrated by your reporting, Min Min. We're also hearing that officials had given warnings about the safety of some of these materials, warning about the structure, warning about the way that this set of buildings was being renovated, just until and up until recently, just in recent weeks, that these warnings had been issued.
Yes, and I think this is one of the most disappointing and frustrating thing about listening to the press yesterday, because there wasn't enough of a reflection of the source of this fire. And the Department of Labour said they had made as many as 16 inspections at the site of the renovation. They knew of the substandard materials. They had sent multiple warning letters to the contractors, and yet somehow nothing was done to prevent the worst tragedy in Hong Kong that we had seen in decades. So there are many questions about exactly who should be accountable here. Aside from the 3 people arrested from the contracting company, should the Department of Labour take some responsibility here? At the press conference yesterday, there were reporters asking if some officials should step down as a result of this, and the spokesperson had sort of sidestepped that question, and some legislative councillors are saying that it's too premature to determine, which official or which company should take the blame here. But certainly investigation is ongoing. There is also a task force set up to investigate corruption, which shows the government perhaps suspects some irregularities when it comes to oversight or the contracting process.
Bloomberg's China correspondent Min Min Lo. Min Min, thank you for that update, reporting for us on the ground, of course, in Hong Kong. Now for some of the stories that you should be thinking about this Friday. China's top diplomat has used a call with his French counterpart to say the two sides needed to support each other, underscoring Beijing's push to win diplomatic backing during that spat that continues, of course, with Japan. Wang Yi said Japanese Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi had made so-called provocative remarks related to Taiwan this month. French President Emmanuel Macron is due to attend a state visit to China next week. Coming up, no agreement yet, but Russian President Vladimir Putin says Donald Trump's proposal for ending the Ukraine war could set the stage for future peace deals. We'll discuss the latest next. This is Bloomberg. This is Horizons Middle East and Africa. Our top stories this morning. Live trading of commodities futures and options on the Chicago Mercantile Exchange is halted. Technical issues hitting assets, including equity futures and WTI. We'll bring you the latest. US President Donald Trump says he will, quote, permanently pause migration from all third world countries, saying it's needed to allow the US system to fully recover. Plus, Hong Kong's deadliest fire in decades intensifies scrutiny of the city's safety inspection system. At least 94 people are believed to have died. It's just gone 9:30 a.m. across the Emirates, 5:30 a.m. here in the UK. I'm Tom McKenzie in London, in for Jemana Basecci. Let's get you a market check then. And global stocks are still set for a very decent showing this month. And you've got European futures pointing to modest gains as well. So there's a little bit of profit taking, it seems, in the last 24 hours or so. But the direction of travel over the last few days has been one towards gains for global stocks. MSCI Asia Pacific today in that region is currently down 0.2%. So a little bit of question marks coming through in the Asian session right now. We have a focus, of course, on Japan, some inflation data there as well. The Kospi under pressure over in Korea. European futures, you've had 4 straight days of gains, pretty modest gains, but they have been there for European stocks. And today the futures picture is looking to add on that very, very modestly. 156 right now in the Japanese yen. December seems to be back in play for the BOJ on this slightly stronger than expected inflation data. Still big question marks as to whether or not the BOJ will go with an interest rate hike that month. Brent at $63.57, up 0.4%. OPEC Plus meeting this weekend, and that is a meeting, of course, we are looking ahead to the impacts on an oil space that has been squeezed in terms of pricing in recent weeks. Now, Russian President, and this ties in, of course, to what's happening in the oil space. Russian President Vladimir Putin says Donald Trump's proposals for ending the war in Ukraine could be the basis for future agreements, but he noted that no final peace plan or draft exists yet. US envoy Steve Witkoff is expected to visit Moscow soon to hold negotiations. For more, I'm joined by Greg Sullivan, Bloomberg's Russia economic and government editor. Greg, what did you make of what the Russian president had to say yesterday?
Well, it was interesting because he said that the proposals at hand could be the basis for a future agreement. Of course, he cautioned that there was no final draft yet and said that talks had to happen and keep going. But he did open the door to this proposal. More interestingly, he acknowledged that the proposal had changed in Geneva after talks with the U.S. and Ukraine, but said the U.S. side was taking into account Russia's interests and did seem open to the proposals. Nonetheless, he also stood his ground in some ways, tempering excitement over the proposals, saying that talks will continue on. He did confirm that a U.S. delegation is expected in Moscow next week. But in other ways, he showed a bit more bravado, sticking to current Russian positions.
What do we know about the European stance at this point, Greg, and how European leaders, whether that's in Paris or London or Berlin, are thinking about the negotiations that seems like will continue next week with that visit to Moscow by the US delegation? How is Europe looking at these discussions at this point?
There's still a lot of doubt on the part of the European capitals that Putin is actually ready to make a deal. They, of course, still said recently that they still assess that he is not ready for a ceasefire. So there's a lot of skepticism towards his position, potentially viewing this as dragging out the process to buy for time. Of course, even in yesterday's comments when he was standing his ground, he said that once Ukraine cedes territory, then the hostilities will stop. He, of course, is after that territory in the eastern Donbass region that Russia has not been able to militarily take yet and is demanding that Ukraine cede. So there's still a bit of standing his ground. And that's one of those issues, again, that in the negotiations, it's hard to see how the Ukrainian position and the Russian position is bridged. And that leads to skepticism in European capitals that these negotiations are actually getting closer to an agreement, even as the White House is saying progress is being made.
OK, Greg Sullivan, Bloomberg's Russia economic and government editor. Thank you for that update. And of course, we'll likely be getting more from Greg and the team next week with that visit by Witkoff and the US delegation to Moscow. Meanwhile, Hungary's leader Viktor Orban says he will also be heading to Moscow at some point. This, of course, and Viktor Orban and Hungary have been a key impediment to the European Union taking a more aggressive stance on Russia, and he has continued to maintain ties, of course, with Moscow. Hungary is, of course, a member of the EU and has been a challenge for other EU members. Orban saying that he will discuss oil and gas supplies and the Ukraine war with Putin, so he will be discussing the energy connections between Hungary and Russia, as well as the conflict with and between Ukraine and Russia on that visit. Viktor Orban of Hungary saying he is heading to Moscow to meet with Vladimir Putin. Now, China has invested billions of dollars in building ports around the world, giving Beijing a strategic advantage as trade tensions rise and sparking security concerns for the rest of the world. Bloomberg Originals looks into the backstory.
Every year, China imports about 66,000 metric tons of these. That's the weight of about 6.5 Parisian landmarks, or if you like, 440 blue whales. And most of these avocados come all the way from Peru. This journey used to take over a month. Now it's a straight shot, cutting it by 10 days. Why? One word: megaport. And it's paid for by China.
Chinese President Xi Jinping begins a week-long South America tour, opening a China-funded mega port in Peru.
This is a huge investment, not only for Peru, but in Latin America, and it is expected to triple agricultural exports of Peru.
Over the last 20 years, China has built up a network of about 100 ports on every continent except Antarctica, clustered around key maritime choke points, which are crucial to global trade.
This gives China a strategic advantage as global trade tensions rise. But it's also sparking concerns.
Even though these ports, by and large, are commercial ports, some of them do actually have the capacity to host naval vessels.
Okay, well, from China to India now, and India releasing second quarter GDP data today. Despite expectations of rapid growth and low inflation, the economy is showing conflicting signs and signals, including a sharp drop in exports and a plunging rupee, clouded by trade uncertainty. For more, let's bring in Bloomberg's Shruti Srivastava in New Delhi. Shruti, what can we expect then from the latest GDP print out of India later today?
So the latest number, which are due today, they are expected to show that the economy expanded by 7.4% as per the survey of economists that Bloomberg has done. And let's note that this continues to be one of the fastest growth across major economies in the world. But economists are concerned that these numbers are masking the underlying weakness in the economy, and they have concerns that the economy might not be firing on all cylinders. Now, majority of this growth is being fueled by government expenditure, government investments, while private investments, they continue to remain sluggish. The other concern is that while there is consumption growth, and it has been spurred by the recent government measures and the festive demand which boosted consumption, but economists say that for a country like India, the consumption growth should ideally be more than the GDP growth. So these are some of the concerns which remain in the economy. As you mentioned, the rupee is at an all-time low. It has plunged to about 90 a dollar. Exports are falling. The trade deficit has ballooned. It was at record in October. So the government has been taking measures to ensure, it can contain some of this. It has taken measures to, spur consumption demand. It did a massive consumption rate tax cut 2 months back. That has spurred domestic demand to some extent. It has tried to reform labor laws, to give a boost to business spending, business expansion. But we can see that the whole uncertainty around U.S. trade deal that continues to weigh on the investor sentiments.
Well, Shruti, on that point, and the lack of a trade deal with the US, with Washington, what has the impact of tariffs been on the growth picture of India?
Yeah, so we have started seeing the impact of the no deal with the U.S. on Indian economic growth. The estimates show that the economy may shave off some 0.8 percentage points in the GDP this year. We have already started seeing that export orders from the U.S. have started drying up. The exports overall, they have not been. The growth has remained muted. In fact, in October and September, we saw for 2 consecutive months exports to the U.S. decline. That has happened. Of course, the other thing is that, of course, because of the widening trade deficit, rupee has plunged to an all-time low. So these impacts are already playing out in the economy. As a result, IMF has also cut its projections for India's fiscal growth next financial year to 6.2% from 6.4 percentage point. However, Indian officials remain optimistic that a deal might be on the horizon. But when is the question?
Shruti, thank you very much indeed. The question of when they can get that deal with the US, given the tariff pressure, of course. Shruti Srivastava with the latest in terms of the preview of the GDP story, and of course, and already the impact that we're seeing as a result of tariffs on that Indian economy and exports out of it. Coming up, Guinea-Bissau's new military leader vows a sweeping crackdown on the drug trade and corruption after a sudden power grab. We bring you that story next. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Horizons Middle East and Africa. I'm Tom Mackenzie in London. Now, Guinea-Bissau's new interim military leader is vowing a crackdown on drug trafficking and corruption after taking power. General Horta Antam was sworn in a day after soldiers arrested the president and ordered last weekend's election results to be suspended. For more, let's bring in Bloomberg's Ondiro Ogunga, who joins us now with the latest. Ondiro, what more do we know?
Good morning, Tom. A lot has escalated in Guinea-Bissau in the last 48 hours. First, it started with gunfire. The presidential palace was seized. The president, Sissoko Embalo, was taken into custody. And quickly, we saw this military general Halted being sworn into power. And if you look at that swearing ceremony, he was flanked by high-ranking military officials, almost as if it's a stamp on approval on this coup that has currently happened in Guinea-Bissau. During his swearing-in speech, he made a couple of declarations. One, he said there was enough evidence to justify this coup that they carried out. And he said, like you mentioned, he will fight drug trafficking. He's going to tackle corruption. But most importantly, he asked for the support and cooperation from the people of Guinea. In the last couple of hours, there have been new developments. We have confirmed that the deposed president has now safely landed in Senegal. They've also closed the borders of the country, and they've imposed an overnight curfew. And unlike previous coups that we've seen in different countries in the Western Sahel, this one was very quiet. There's a lot of confusion. We haven't seen the usual celebration, and it's for a couple of reasons. Outside of the political instability is the drug trafficking that is a pain point, not only for the government, but also for the people. This is a country that sits right between Latin America, the drug trafficking gangs, and also drug users in Europe. It's such a notorious route that it has been labeled a narco state. And yet again, the people of Guinea-Bissau, who depend on selling cashew nut and fishing, are seeing power exchanging hands without the decision that they made in the ballot being taken into account.
Well, on that point then, on Ondiro, how is this coup playing out in the region, particularly amid concerns about backsteps when it comes to democracy?
Guinea-Bissau is a very interesting country. It's small, 2.5 million people, 2.5 billion economy, but big problems. And if we talk about coups, they have experienced some of the most coups in the region, close to 17 coups. They've experienced a civil war. Actually, only one elected president has completed their term. Last year, in October of 2024, there was an attempted coup. In February of 2025, there was an attempted coup. And now with this successful coup, it makes it 5 successfully completed coups in Guinea-Bissau. And it's not just that country. It's across the Western Sahel. And, you know, the interim military government says they'll only be in office for a year. But that's not the truth. If you look at what has happened in the region, you look at Guinea, you look at Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso, that's not what has happened. In Guinea, when Doumbouya came into power, he swore that he's only a transitional leader. They'll transition back to a civilian government. 4 years later, he's still in power. He tweaked the constitution. And now he could be in power for the next 14 years. The same thing has happened in Chad. And then come regional bodies like ECOWAS, who have very little say in this, because when they threatened to invade Niger after a military coup, we saw these countries break away, form alliance of the Sahel. There are also problems if you look at democracy. Ivory Coast has a 4th-term president. Cameroon is now staring at a lifetime president who might likely die in power. And so these military leaders are emboldened by the fact that there's no pushback and there's no repercussion.
Okay, Bloomberg's Ondiro Ogunga with that update. Really fascinating events transpiring in Guinea-Bissau, of course, and broader implications for the region. Ondiro, thank you. Now for a look at other stories that we're following this Friday. Rwanda's President Paul Kagame is accusing the Democratic Republic of Congo of failing to honour key commitments in US and Qatar-backed peace talks, a move he says is keeping the conflict in its eastern region going. Kagame says he and Congo's president may travel to Washington as early as next month to try to finalise a peace deal. This comes as the UN warns of a worsening humanitarian crisis with more than 10 million people in eastern Congo at risk of severe food insecurity without urgent help. Zimbabwe is rolling out a new gold royalty structure to take advantage of the metal's price surge. Starting the 1st of January, miners will pay between 3% and 10% depending on the price of gold, a move the government says will ensure the industry contributes more during commodity booms. Zimbabwe's finance minister says the changes will also help close loopholes and curb illicit trade while opening the legal market to more players, including authorised dealers and individuals who hold certified gold bars. Coming up, we explore the circular deals in the AI industry and assess who can best weather the storm if the AI bubble bursts. That is next. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Horizons Middle East and Africa. I'm Tom McKenzie in London. Global markets watching the AI boom closely, of course, for signs of a possible bubble. Here's what our guests have been telling us about potential risks in the space.
There's been a lot of talk about an AI bubble. From our vantage point, we see something very different.
What's different in this cycle is the problem we have right now is supply, not demand.
What you see with the level of spending that they're putting into it. So it's a lot and it's moving fast. But the difference between now and 2000 is that these are massive companies with strong financial performance.
A lot of the bubble could be potentially in terms of the run-up on the valuation side. But the fundamentals of the industry, I think, is a long-term trend.
My stance generally is that bubbles are a good thing because they mobilize capital and talent into important problems, important sectors. And I think we are in a really interesting time.
Many companies about a year ago were waiting to see what was going to happen with the AI bubble, but now no company will have the stomach today to wait for what might happen. The question that companies are asking themselves today is, are they moving fast enough?
I think, over to say 10 or 100 years, I think we'll gradually underestimate the technology that is AI.
Well, the AI industry is awash with concerns, of course, of circular deals and whether the multi-billion-dollar spending is sustainable. Here's a closer look at the AI money machine and some of the key Asian players involved.
We're thoughtful, along with OpenAI, thoughtful in aligning on and taking into consideration visibility of demand and their financing capabilities. And so I think the ambition's large, but the execution is disciplined.
As tech firms ramp up spending on advanced chips and data centers, concerns are mounting that the AI boom is being propped up by a wave of circular deals. At the center of it all is NVIDIA, the company often described as selling the shovels in today's AI gold rush, as it strikes mega deals to invest in the very companies that buy its products. With capital flowing into companies that have yet to turn a profit, cycling back into data centers and ultimately returning to NVIDIA as revenue from their chips, trillions of dollars are rapidly being spent on technology that remains somewhat unproven as a business model.
If we're not going to find $2 trillion of revenue to justify the AI revolution, which I think is impossible by 2030, the likelihood is we're going to have a significant correction.
Many of Asia's largest tech firms are exposed to the AI boom as they play a critical role in the global supply chain. SoftBank is positioned primarily as a financier, with active investments like OpenAI feeding into its profits. Its stakes in chip companies also provide real cash income. In November, the Japanese conglomerate revealed it had sold off its entire stake in NVIDIA for $5.8 billion to bankroll founder Masayoshi Son's AI ambitions. This has amplified market anxiety over an industry bubble. Meanwhile, South Korean heavyweight Samsung Electronics and SK Hynix have seen margins rising on a commodity that NVIDIA's GPUs can't function without: high-bandwidth memory chips, or HBMs. Bloomberg Economics sees demand for Korean chips surging by 45% next year, almost twice the current clip.
If you are in the players, then I don't really see that there was that much bubble. There's a lot of potential.
And TSMC's results are often seen as an impartial barometer for the real demand underneath the hype. It's the go-to chip maker for NVIDIA and its competitors AMD and Qualcomm. In October, when TSMC posted its slowest monthly revenue growth in more than a year, it fueled fears that the AI rally itself had become unhinged from fundamentals. Relative valuations of Asian markets suggest that companies in this region are generally more protected by real earnings expectations compared with U.S. counterparts.
As we get forward into this bubble-like period, it becomes an even more difficult question as a capital allocator in terms of whether you continue to shovel cash into this potential inferno.
And while some skeptics continue to warn of an overdue correction, others remain confident in AI's long-term potential.
The bubble is merely that it's gotten ahead of itself, not the likelihood of growth in the future. Okay, not saying it's worth its price, but there's absolute substance under the foam.
Sherry-Ann, Bloomberg, Tokyo.
Well, staying on tech, Alibaba has made a rare foray into hardware, releasing smart glasses powered by QN AI models. The product, called Quark S1, features built-in translucent displays that superimpose contextual information on the user's view of their surroundings. The glasses are equipped with cameras, bone conduction microphones and swappable batteries. They're available now in China, with Alibaba promising international versions next year. Let's get an update in terms of the outage that we have seen as a result of technical problems at the CME over in the US, the impact that's having across different asset classes and indexes. This is down to what have been told, down to a data center cooling issue that the CME, the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, of course, depends on. So this is impacting equities, including US futures. As you can see, S&P, E-minis, NASDAQ 100 futures impacted at a time, of course, when we have very thin volumes because of the Thanksgiving holiday in the US. Of course, traders will be back at their desks for half a day of trading stateside today, but it's worth taking that into account as well. So there's technical glitch and the impact across asset classes as a result of the CME technical problems. That is it for Horizons Middle East and Africa. I'm Tom McKenzie. Stay with us for Daybreak Europe. That's coming up next. This is Bloomberg.